Hello, everyone. This is Russ Cooper for another session, our second session, as a matter of fact, of Major Cooper in Hot. Recall that Major Cooper is, well, that's my nom de plume. I use Major Russ Cooper, retired. I'm former military pilot, fighter pilot. And the in hot portion, that talks to fighter pilot speak when clearance or control wants to clear you in on a target with live weapons. They'll clear you in hot. The pilot will respond cleared in hot, and off he goes on his target run with his live rockets, bombs, guns, or whatever he has in his little repertoire. So today we're rolling in hot with an able wingman, Julius Ruechel. This is the second time Julius has been with us, and we had a talk with him about his essay that came out a few weeks ago. And he did a data analysis on COVID deaths, both inside and outside of government institutions. And I just want to share a screen here, Julius. So I'm going to
go ahead.
Share a screen here. And can you see that?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Julius's first interview he had with us when we talked about data analysis, but today's topic is going to be his most recent essay, and it's called "The Emperor Has No Clothes: Finding the Courage to Break the Spell." And you can see up here we have his handle for his website, where you can take a look at that. Essay on your own. And I was going to go back to talk about. Remember, our first interview was involved with discussing his other essay, "The Lies Exposed by the Numbers, Fear, Misdirection, and Institutional Deaths, an Investigative Report." Now, out of this report, one thing that really sprung out at me was he broke down he did some problem solving, did some data analysis on the basis of Canada's own public health data, and he came up with this graphic. And basically what it does is it shows people dying of COVID both inside and outside of institutions. And this red little corner here, those are the numbers of people who died in institutions. Those are government prisons, hospitals, long-term care facilities. That total population is 292,000. And the total deaths out of that population was, wow, 18,000, 8+ personnel dying so-called COVID. Now, outside of the institutions, you have the rest of Canada, and you see you have a population of about 38 million here. And you can see that we have seniors outside of institutions and living amongst the rest of the population. And when you look at the total number of deaths incurred in populations outside of the institutions, you're only talking about 6,000 people out of 38 million. So the data analysis is really stunning, and it shows that maybe we don't have a problem with lockdowns. Maybe the problem isn't people not following lockdown rules. Maybe the real problem is the institutions and the people who are in charge of them not doing their job, because that's where the deaths are coming in. So that data analysis really struck home to me, and we had an excellent talk with Julius about this phenomena that he uncovered with Canada's own public health data and statistics. I should just come off of share there. I'll stop sharing. So what really that was really stunning. That was a great conversation we had, Julius. But in your most recent paper, where you talk about the emperor with no clothes, I was struck again because up front you say that people don't look at data. They don't pay attention to data until the conditions are right, until the psychology is right. And so that really, then you kicked off your paper, and your paper, most recent paper, I really think talks to the psychology of fear. And that's what we're dealing with right now. You use the analogy, the emperor with no clothes. You also up front say that you're asking the good and silent people to consider what is going on and to consider speaking up. The good and silent people, is that where's that reference come from? I've heard that before.
That's a Martin Luther King Jr. Reference. Like he used that analogy when he was talking about trying to get enough people to step out and to challenge the segregation laws. Um, and so like what he realized is, and it's sort of similar to what's going on now, is that if the government has no interest in actually engaging in a negotiation, and in our case, it's to actually talk about the data, because the data is where they have a weakness, they've got a problem, they have no interest in talking about it.
Sure do.
So at that point, it comes down to that the government has to lose the support of the crowd. And so that's that psychological issue that we're trying to figure out here, is how do we get all the folks that are seeing this to actually come out of the shadows and say what they feel about it, so that it becomes visible enough that we're challenging the government's illusion of conformity, right? And so what Martin Luther King Jr. realized is that, like in their case, they had to put themselves in the front lines of these protests and stand strong in order to basically show that the government was being completely horrible to all of them, and win the hearts and minds of the people to start standing up for them.
So
In
you're
our
looking
case,
at, you're using the analogy of the emperor had no clothes. And I take it what you're saying is we had one little lad there who was maybe naive, maybe he was just so young that he wasn't well learned enough in the art of lying or whatever, or going along or conforming. And he pops up and he says, "Hey, the emperor is naked."
yeah,
And that is the catalyst. That
yeah.
is the catalyst for people in the crowd to look at each other and look at the look at the emperor and start to talk about him.
Yeah, because in Martin Luther King's case, you're talking about like the challenging the idea that there should be segregation, and so that was more of a physical standout in the lineup of a crowd type of situation. Whereas in our case, to win the crowd, it's a public mood shift that says, I'm not okay with this anymore for myself, I'm not okay with this for my family. So it doesn't require necessarily standing out on a street and confronting the government that way. It requires literally waking up the folks that next to you to say the emperor has no clothes.
Excuse me for that phone there.
No worries.
There.
That's what
Okay.
editing is for.
Yeah, that's what it's there for. And
Yeah, so
okay,
it
so
really is that idea of standing up next to your friends and family and just mocking the whole thing or laughing or pointing at it. Like it's that first seed of doubt that maybe not everybody believes this. Maybe there is an alternative narrative. And if there's enough of us that are showing that we don't go along with this anymore, it breaks that spell that you know, people swallowing their doubts down because they're afraid of speaking out against the entirety of the crowd, you know?
now in the meantime, we have that obviously hasn't happened yet. We've got good data out. People like yourself are breaking down the data and coming up with a good analysis of what exactly is going on. But the crowd seems to still be going along with what the government is saying. What's the psychology there? How does the government make that happen? What are their strategies that they put in play?
I think this cancel culture that we're facing is playing a huge role. That, I mean, you know, talking to all sorts of people, there's many people that are completely not okay with this, but they don't step out into the public eye to actually say it because there's such a huge cost to doing so. I mean, look at this situation with Dr. Francis Christian in Saskatchewan, where he had the courage to raise some concerns about vaccinating children, and has now had his, like, he's been fired from all sorts of positions with the College of Medicine. So everybody that's actually in a position of authority or in you know, in academia, in the medical community, that wants to speak out is weighing their mortgage against opening their mouth and saying something that they're going to be crucified for.
And we see that happen with Mr. Christian. We see that happen in the religious sector as well. We have a
Very much
number
so.
of pastors out in Alberta that have been thrown in jail summarily,
Yeah.
treated like carcasses of beef and thrown in the back of paddy wagons to be carted off to jail because they have a church ceremony and they try to preach to their congregation. We also see doctors, some doctors beginning to speak out.
Yeah.
And it is incredible, really incredible to see the cancel culture come out and really jump on them with tremendous force. And like you say, with tremendous threats of losing jobs and all the rest of it.
Well, and
So
I think that the doctors that are actually involved with on the government side, I mean, they all now have their entire careers lined up onto this, so they can't actually even afford to have a debate with us anymore. They can't afford to lose this because they will be held accountable for human rights violations if this stuff comes to the surface and they
wow,
realize that, you know,
wow.
I mean, it is ultimately, and it sounds like a harsh thing to say, but if you are stripping people of their charter rights in order to impose lockdowns, that is the reality of it. And if you look at how many, you know, elderly have basically died in isolation in these old folks' homes, and people driven to suicide, people losing their homes and their businesses, there's real legal repercussions for all of the folks that have been involved with this. So, I mean, for them, they're not going to look at the data until the crowd loses its patience with this and forces basically forces the institutions to abandon the leaders.
So it sounds like the leadership, the people promoting the lockdown strategies and all the harm that ensues have really solidified their positions because you say they have no choice. They are stuck.
I think they are. I think that's the trouble, is that, you know, there's a lot of folks that still think that we can win this by exposing enough of, like, trying to like find that magic bullet to be able to confront the government or the public health officials with, hey, this doesn't make any sense. But they're going to just keep spinning this and spinning this because their own necks are on the line, like figuratively speaking. I mean, look at Governor Cuomo in New York and all the contortions he's going through to avoid dealing with the fact that he put out an order that transferred patients infected with COVID into nursing homes. I
He's
mean,
dancing pretty hard. He's
yeah,
dancing hard. Yeah.
I mean, this is a fairly significant issue for all of these folks. And I mean, as long as that environment persists, you also start getting a lot of folks boiling to the surface, like into leadership positions, that as long as they say things that keep pushing the narrative, they get more of the microphone, and the reasonable voices keep getting shoved aside or being canceled altogether.
I
So
see
it's sort
that.
of it's like a cult that essentially slowly winds itself to greater extremes, and there's no exit strategy for them other than to hang on.
I
And so
see
that's,
that.
I think, where we have to be able to understand that our only route out of this, it's not going to happen through the courts until the government, or sorry, until the majority of Canadians are actually not okay with this. Then the courts will side with the public sentiment again. So we're really down to step out, speak out. You need to show yourself in order to break this illusion of conformity.
Yeah. In your essay, you note the fact that this psychology on the part of the people who are pushing, say, this narrative, this we must be fearful of the virus narrative. Uh, that psychology comes in bits and drabs, and it's most effective up front when it comes very subtly, when it's eased in, and you have your rights kind of chopped away a little bit at a time, so that over the expanse of time, you don't really notice it, but when you look around, you've basically almost lost everything. Is that what you see happening now? And now, with people starting to talk, it does seem like the powers that be are becoming a little bit more forceful. They're becoming. Is that what you see unfolding? Is they're going to have to double down? They're going to have to get more coercive?
Very much so. I mean, I see that it has to get uglier before it can get better. That you know, the more that we all speak out against this, the more they have to keep cracking down and censoring us on social media. I mean, we're now up against, you know, Bill C-36 that may be basically giving the government control over hate speech, which by now is clear is anything that's political speech or anti-lockdown speech is all being wrapped into that. So I can see that it has to almost get to the point where people feel so suffocated by it that they get the courage to start speaking out against this.
And now maybe that's why part of the reason we're seeing this doubling down, and now all of a sudden it's vaccine passports.
Yeah.
I myself, I don't know if this the whole aspect of vaccine passports and the loss of civil liberties that entails is all about them just doubling down on the narrative, or if there is some other agenda, you know, behind the curtain here that they are working towards. I just don't know. I think it's something that maybe Canadians have to talk about, though.
I think in some respects, it almost doesn't matter whether there's an agenda at the moment, because once that system is in place, creativity being what it is, you're going to see that it's going to be appropriated for a million other things. And it doesn't take long until you have a full-scale Chinese social credit score system, whether that was
Or
the initial intention or not. I mean, I can see it spiraling into, have you got all your other vaccines? Have you got your flu vaccine, et cetera, et cetera? And then from there, it goes into, well, you're spreading dangerous misinformation about COVID. Maybe you shouldn't be allowed to, who knows what they use it for. So that's the thing, is that the initial intention often doesn't resemble where it ends up evolving into.
we're in a very, very troublesome path here. And you mentioned C-36, and that probably is a topic for a whole other interview. But I'm looking at C-36, and you're talking about people being able to bring you to task with house arrest because they think you might be thinking about doing something antisocial or saying something antisocial. Antisocial, what's that mean? That means whatever they don't like, I guess. Plus $70,000 fines. I mean, this is
even without a crime being committed.
Without a crime being committed, this is quite Orwellian. It's 1984 in spades. It's I don't think Orwell thought that this type of it could go this far, but I think that's the path we're on, and it's incredible.
Well, I mean, if you look at, I think it was in New South Wales in Australia, their chief medical officer is on camera talking to the people about, you should not speak to your neighbor anymore because you might spread COVID.
Yeah.
Right. So they're actually trying to prevent people talking. Well, from there, it's not a big leap to utilize Bill C-36. And even in Nova Scotia, I think it's Robert Strang, he was in May, he had a press conference where he actually said one of the reasons that the lockdowns are persisting is to prevent people from getting together and spreading misinformation. It was not about COVID itself. It was about containing ideas and thoughts.
Now, to add to that, sorry, Julius, but we also have the Prime Minister of New Zealand, who's come out and said, you should only get your information from us. Don't trust anything that's non-government source for your virus information. We are the ones that you need to listen to. In the United Kingdom, there was an official, Madam Chant, I think her name was, and she came up with the same directive or advice for people not to talk to each other about this stuff, because it might further misinformation, and you're not supposed to do that. Well, this is in a free and open society that we used to have. This is very tainted. This is not the way that our society is built.
No, and I think what I fear as well is that a lot of folks that are on the sidelines of this, that are not okay with it, are still hoping that somehow it'll resolve itself, or that, if the right people speak out, that, this will challenge it and that it'll fade away. But that slow creep isn't stoppable if there's only this sort of a small incremental pushback against it. The only way that this stops is if you go, whoa, this is the risk, even if we don't know where it ends up, is so great that I have to jump in full bore right now and speak at the top of my lungs.
Okay, and we're beginning to see that. I look at the instance of the public school system in the United States. We see an awful lot of parents groups starting to stand up and speak out against critical race theory being taught in their schools to their children, their grade school children, and it's getting quite loud and quite vocal. I don't know. It seems like sometimes something happens where a switch is flicked. And I got another example here that I remember very well back in 2003. You're probably too young at that time to remember anything of that sort, Julius. But Rogers Communications came out with a scheme that's called negative marketing, where they're going to bill their customers extra money for extra services. And if you didn't want these services, well, you had to tell them proactively that you had to write them and say, no, I don't want this service, so please don't bill me. Well, at that time, there was a switch that was flicked, because people really got up in arms, and people started taking their cable boxes into the Rogers outlets to cancel their subscriptions, because no one was going to make them pay when they didn't have anything to say about it. So take your cable box back. And I stood in a line for half an hour myself to get to return my cable box. And I remember the television programs at night on the news, they would show these long lines of people going into Rogers to turn in their cable boxes. A switch was flicked. And quite frankly, this is building to such an extent. It's building to a crescendo here. I can feel it. Sooner or later, there's going to be a switch that's flicked. And I don't know, maybe it's this next election is going to, we're going to see some funny results or whatever. But
I mean, I've been watching.
That,
yeah, I've been watching France right now. Like, I mean, that seems to be where the greatest momentum is building. And I mean, I think their biggest crowds in Paris, according to the police, I think was 160,000, which means it was probably bigger. But
yes.
I mean, you're still not quite big enough at that level to actually, put fear into the heart of the government. It's still small enough that they're trying to push back, but it's getting close. Right? At some point, the institutions are going to be looking at these crowds and going, well, do I really want to side with a million people in the French, or against a million people in Paris's streets, or do I maybe want to take off my helmet and side with them and hold the government accountable? So it sort of forces the institutions that are lower down in the government pyramid to have to evaluate, do they want to see their careers tied to the futures of these politicians that are running the show, or would they rather tie their futures to the crowd that's no longer going to accept this? Because I mean, once you reach 160,000 people in Paris alone, those people are not going to change their minds again, right? So at this point, the flow of hearts and minds is all in one direction, and it's going to keep growing.
You've lost them. Now, the other thing that maybe could contribute towards that switch being flipped is I like your analogy of the old Bronco, of the old Bronc.
Yeah.
You talk about these wild herds of horses that we have roaming through places like Alberta, Utah, and the Western North America. And you say that the strategy of slice by slice, getting a young bronc to accept the bridle and the whip is possible, and you do it bit by bit, and bit by bit you engage the trust of the bronc, the young bronc, and that's how you break him and train him. But you say, and it's very interesting, that the old broncs, they'll have nothing to do with it. Yeah. They will not be broken, and you basically got to the only thing you can do with them is let them go, kill them. Put them in a glue factory or make them horse meat, and I found that analogy to be very stirring. And I'm wondering if there's a bunch of old broncs out there that are going to come to the fore and perhaps help flip this switch. But I think you made the point in my mind that the broncs, I think, were analogous to the principled.
Yeah. Those
who have principles that red lines that will not be crossed, those who have principles that are sacrosanct and they will not give up. Yeah. And I think that's what you're talking about. Do I have the correct sense of that?
Very much so. Yeah, it's this idea that, even if the cost could be very big to speak out and the reward very small, that if you allow that creep to continue, you're going to end up living without freedom. And so that's where, you speak out on principle. It's sort of, I mean, the best analogy historically is, the motto of, I believe it's New Hampshire, live free or die.
Live free or die, yeah.
Right. And it goes back to the American Revolution of saying, it doesn't matter what the cost is, I'm going to keep speaking out. I mean, this is a different time and a different kind of battle, but it's about speaking out even when there's a cost to yourself, because by doing that, you raise the price of tyranny, because it immediately, if you go and pick on one of these pastors or Adamson Barbecue or Dr. Francis Christian, if a million other people immediately stand up and say, I'm not okay with it either, what are you going to do? You're going to arrest us all? Or you're going to fire us all just for speaking out? And all of a sudden it makes the government's strategy look absolutely ridiculous. Whereas when they only do it to one at a time, they can make an example and scare everybody into the shadows. So the more these intimidation tactics happen, the more you have to step into the storm and say, well, do it to me too. Try it. Let's see what your credibility does. It's like that really is the key of peaceful resistance, is to actually be willing to share the cost of the persecution to the point where enforcement simply is no longer possible. Can you really put 1,000 pastors in church because they all open their doors? Can you really round up the entire small business community in Ontario just because one person started opening the doors of their restaurant and the rest of them did it too? It's not feasible at this stage. If you wait long enough, then you're in a Soviet situation where it is feasible. So there's a window of opportunity, and I hope everybody takes it because it's closing fast.
I think you're correct in that it's individual people who are going to have to find their principles, find what their red lines are, and come out stating what they are in no uncertain terms. Because unfortunately, it really appears that the institutions that we have that are supposed to do that job on our behalf, our courts, our law enforcement, our political leaders who are supposed to be representing us, and don't seem to be representing us at all, but seem to be representing some sort of a psychology of fear, or representing some sort of power gain, or to control us more and more and more. So the individual has to actually step forward, and in light of the fact that there is an absence of institutions who are prepared to fight the fight on our behalf. I'm thinking about the charter. The charter is supposed to be a protective document. It's supposed to protect the citizen from the government, and I don't see it anywhere in any discussions ongoing for a year and a half now since our civil liberties have been lifted, and we've basically turned ourselves into a police state. Where's the charter? Do you have any thoughts on the charter and why it seems to be missing in action?
Yeah, it's quite remarkable that there's an entire, like, we've abandoned this idea of protecting individuals from, as you say, from the government. And there's more of this, there's a psychological shift towards, doing the greater good, even if it comes at the price of individuals. But that's a fundamental rethink of how our society is structured, because in a liberal democracy, that charter is meant to be the checks and balances on a democratic vote that says no matter what you vote for, you cannot overstep certain boundaries that start to strip individuals of their rights. I mean, this was kind of the lesson of World War II, and watching what happened under the Nazi regime or under the Soviets as well, that trampling individuals because the government says so and they have 50% of the crowd on their side is not acceptable. You have to step in and protect the individuals first. But that philosophical shift, I think, has already happened long before COVID came along, that we're seeing more and more of this group activity. I mean, even whether it's critical race theory or this cancel culture, and all of these things are kind of motivated by trying to produce outcomes that are, fairer, by engineering and stripping individuals of their actual individual autonomy, which is deeply unfair from a liberal democratic perspective.
I think what we're doing here is we're in trying to be fair, as you say, and approach the common good. We're kind of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, because the real intent of the charter, as you say, I think, is to protect the fundamental rights of the individual. And now we seem to have this balancing act going on over the past several decades, where the individual rights are being balanced off and away for the rights of the collective. And the collective might be a special interest group, or it might be a moneyed interest group, or it might be this, or it might be that, but it's not the individual.
Well,
yeah,
I mean, there's that lovely quote, I can't remember who said it, that you can have freedom or you can have equality, but you can't have both.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, I guess we can see that happening. The charter does have its warts, and I think what kind of has been exploited is Section 1 of the charter, which comes out and says that these fundamental rights that we have, freedom of speech, freedom of association, assembly, freedom of religion and conscience, are not really all that sacrosanct, because reasonable limits can be placed upon them if it can be demonstrated that it's required in a free and democratic society. That section, I think, has been taken by our courts and has been run to ground in a different direction than the charter actually
Yeah.
needs to be going. And so we have this collectives being serviced before the individual. And now we have a case, now we have a time where the individual is losing his abilities to live his life and seek his own happiness. And we're in
Well,
quite a dither here.
I'm really shocked actually by that, because that was introduced under Pierre Elliott Trudeau in 1980.
Yeah.
And the previous Bill of Rights did not have that Section 1 in it. So
Yeah.
that was a huge fundamental rethink on how our entire country works. And like, I'm really surprised that there doesn't seem to have been a huge outrage. I mean, you basically took, I mean, it wasn't as strong before as what the US Constitution is, but it was still sort of much clearer that there's the society is built around the individual as the foundational stone. And from 1980 onwards, it wasn't. So that's in a sense where you can see how already then this greater good thinking had already kicked in. I was reading through some of the documents around it, and it was literally intended to be able to override constitutional protections if the good of the nation requires it.
Yeah.
Where was the conversation? I mean, I'm too young to have been aware of that conversation at that time, but you must have.
No. I'm not. I remember it quite well. There was conversation around it, but I don't think it was covered as fully as it should have been. But there were voices that came out against the whole idea of Section 1, and there were some premiers, Lougheed in Alberta, Lyon in Manitoba, and Blakeney in Saskatchewan all came out with the belief that they weren't going to sign, because they said this whole Section 1 gives potentially the judicial regime of the country too much power. They can make and break individual rights easily with this kind of reasonable limitation clause. And so they were not going to sign, and that was the whole beginning of the notwithstanding clause, Section 33 of the Charter. So the notwithstanding clause put in by Lougheed, Blakeney, and Lyon stated that notwithstanding anything, Section 1 of the Charter might say, the representative government of the people, they have the right to declare a notwithstanding application that gives the people the right to say that this decision or that decision can't go forward. But of course, now we see the situation where the notwithstanding clause is treated like is treated like a leper. Yeah. Like if you even talk about it, well, you're not for freedom, you're not for the Charter, you're not for the Constitution, you're not for liberal democracy. Yeah. But they couldn't be further from the truth.
But I'm also seeing that, like, I think it was in Ontario as well, but definitely in Quebec, where the notwithstanding clause is also now being used as an excuse to protect rules within the province that would run foul of the Charter of Rights. So it's being spun the opposite direction. Yes. So in a sense, it's like they've put a Band-Aid over a bad rule, and now that Band-Aid is itself also being misused. Like it really comes back down to, if you don't have absolute protections, you don't have protections. Because yes. As long as the mood of the public can go along with it, you can override any part of it, which we're seeing now.
Yeah, and I guess that's where we are now when we talk about people really need to speak out and demand their red lines not be exceeded, that their civil liberties are restored and retained, because there's not much else that's going to help them make it so.
No, and I mean, I think the moment that the government shifted from going with recommendations to going with mandatory laws, in reality, it stopped being about COVID and it started becoming about what kind of society you're going to live with. What kind of freedoms do you have? That's really what's at stake here. It's not about COVID itself. That's the mechanism that it's playing out on. Yeah. But the moment it turned into a legal situation, it really comes down to what kind of rights do you have through your charter? And it's looking like we don't have any if we don't speak out and do something about it, regardless of how we feel about COVID.
And what's really worrisome, I find, is the fact that all of our political parties that have seats in Parliament, all the legacy parties, yeah, they all seem to be on side with the mandates. They don't see a problem, and that tells me that this next election that's coming up, probably pretty soon, the ballot box question really should be about our civil liberties, about our rights and freedoms, because they are hanging in the balance here. and they're not being talked at all by the political parties that are in the House of Commons right now. Maybe I'm thinking maybe what needs to happen is people have to stop voting for parties who are not representing the people of Canada, and really take a close look at the actual individual that they're putting into the House of Commons on their behalf. Is he or she the type of person that's going to speak out on their behalf, secure their rights and freedoms and civil liberties, and get us away from this cancel culture and all this wokeism that is really killing us?
Well, it's interesting, like the founding fathers in the US were all against political parties. And then once their system was set up, they all ended up embracing them because it's awfully useful in order to muscle through things. And once one party evolves, you almost need another party.
Yeah.
But they at least have a mechanism that can work without parties. Whereas in Canada, the way we're set up, it's almost impossible to run our politics without political parties, unless we actually get an elected Senate and an elected Prime Minister separately, which we do not have. We have just the actual House of Commons.
No, interesting note on the in the Canadian Constitution part, though, that the Canadian Constitution doesn't say anything about parties either, just like the American Constitution. Yeah. All it talks about is an individual's a citizen's right to vote and have a representative represent them in the seat of power in government. That's all there is.
As long as you're not electing a prime minister separately from your MP, the prime minister is going to be whoever the MPs of the party that gets in charge, whoever is their leader. Yeah. So by that, just through that alone, we're essentially tied to make sure you vote for a party and not for your best MP, so that you end up with the right leader at the top. Yeah. Well, you're trapped, right?
Yep, but I don't know. Maybe it's time to for folks to have a rethink about what's more important. Is it the person that they put in Parliament, or is it the Prime Minister of the party? But I got a feeling I'll be having more to say on that later. But
yeah, I think there's going to be a fundamental rethink or shift, if we can sort this out, that has to seriously look at the structure in most countries. And even in the United States, they have the right structure, but they're basically ignoring all the principles behind it. So they have the same rethink going on. It just doesn't necessarily require reopening their constitution, whereas in our case, it may need that.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground here. I mean, we've covered your data analysis paper. We've covered your Emperor Has No Clothes paper. We've covered Martin Luther King and the Constitution of the United States of America and Canada. Yeah. And I'm just wondering, what's next for you? What's on the horizon for, what are you thinking of tackling next?
I'm working on a few pieces. I'll keep my mouth shut just in case some pieces you start researching and then you find yourself in a corner and going, I don't know how to release that in the current form. And then it has to sit for a while and it might come out in a different way. So, but I'm still writing.
I'll be looking for it, Julius, to see what you have to say, and maybe even get you in here for another Major Cooper in Hot session.
Anytime. I really enjoy talking with you.
Okay. In the meantime, where can people get to see your stuff? Give yourself a little bit of advertising.
Yeah, my website's the best spot to find me at www.juliusruechel.com. And I've got links to all my social media and my YouTube channel and all that on the website. But depending on where all the censorship goes, the website is the number one place. And make sure you sign up for my email notifications. So if I lose my my social media accounts for some reason, you can still keep up with me.
Yeah, very, very wise advice. Yeah. For anybody out there who's thinking about taking a look at Canadian Citizens for Charter Rights and Freedoms, or C3RF, our site is at canadiancitizens.org. All of our links are there. All of my updates. I get updates out on a fairly regular basis. So if you want to take a look at those, please do. And with that, I guess we'll sign off, Julius, until we see each other again.
Thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Julius. Really enjoyed it. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.